At 72 years old, Ernesto was walking through the used car lot when his heart nearly stopped. There, dusty among dozens of vehicles, sat the blue 1963 Ford F100 that his father had sold decades ago to pay hospital bills. It wasn't just a similar truck, it was exactly João Santos' vehicle, with the same engraving on the engine. J. Santos, 1963. Without hesitation, the elderly man spent all his savings to reclaim that family relic, ignoring his daughter's criticism as she called him crazy. For weeks, he obsessively dedicated himself to restoration, reliving precious memories of Saturday mornings, washing the car with his late father. Each cleaned part revealed new details that transported him back to childhood, when João Santos would say that truck was more reliable than any person. But it was while sanding the rusted bottom of the truck bed that Ernesto discovered something that would change his life forever. A small rectangular protrusion, clearly a hastily welded cover by amateur hands. After hours of meticulous work, he managed to open the secret compartment and removed time-yellowed documents and a black-covered notebook. The first document he opened made his legs tremble. A birth certificate from 1962, but the name wasn't João Santos. It was Giuseppe Santana, born in Italy. The man he had known his entire life as his father had assumed a false identity upon arriving in Brazil. The notebook revealed a devastating truth. Giuseppe had fled Sicily in 1961 after witnessing a mafia assassination, knowing his life was in danger. The clandestine journey to Brazil, the false documents, an Italian family left behind without news. Each page unveiled a secret kept for 40 years. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. An official letter from Italian police in 1965 informing that the criminals had been arrested. João Santos could have returned home safely, reunited with his true family, reclaimed his identity. The letter was never opened. Why would a man who loved family so much choose to live a lie forever? What else had Giuseppe hidden in those documents? And the final letter, addressed to Ernesto himself, written just months before his father's death. What secrets would it still reveal about the man who sacrificed his identity? Ernesto walked through the used car lot with slow steps, leaning on his dark wooden cane. At 72 years old, he wasn't looking for a vehicle for himself, but something caught his attention at the back of the dusty yard. Among dozens of cars lined up, a faded blue pickup truck made him stop abruptly. The elderly man's heart raced when he recognized the exact model of the 1963 Ford F100 that his father had sold decades ago. His hands trembled as he approached, observing every detail that confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just a similar truck. It was exactly his late father João Santos's vehicle. The salesman, a stocky middle-aged man, noticed the elderly man's interest and approached with a commercial smile. "Beautiful, isn't it? That one has history," he said while affectionately patting the side of the rusty truck bed. Ernesto swallowed hard before asking about the vehicle's origin, trying to control the emotion in his voice. The salesman explained he had bought it from a collector who had recently died, but didn't know details about its previous origin. "Can I take a look at the engine?" asked Ernesto, knowing he would find definitive confirmation there. On the engine block, hand-engraved with a screwdriver, was still visible. J. Santos, 1963. Without hesitation, Ernesto negotiated the purchase immediately, paying cash with savings he kept for emergencies. The price was high for his financial conditions, but nothing in the world would prevent him from recovering that family relic. During the journey to his house, memories flooded his mind like powerful ocean waves. He remembered perfectly the day his father sold the truck in 1984 to pay hospital debts after his mother's death. João Santos cried that day, not only for the loss of his wife, but also for parting with the vehicle that represented years of hard work. "One day she'll come home," his father had murmured, not knowing those words would become prophetic. Upon arriving home, Ernesto parked the truck in the garage and called his daughter Maria, who lived in another city. "Dad, have you gone crazy? You spent your savings on an old truck?" she questioned over the phone, worried about her widowed father's impulsive decision. Ernesto tried to explain the sentimental importance of the discovery, but knew it would be difficult to make someone understand. His daughter promised to visit him on the weekend to talk about this madness, as she herself defined it. After hanging up the phone, the elderly man returned to the garage and spent long minutes just observing the vehicle. Tears silently ran down his wrinkled face as he touched the steering wheel, worn by time. That night, Ernesto could barely sleep, anxious to begin restoring the truck the next day. He had decided he would do all the work alone, as a way to honor his father's memory. He got up before dawn and headed to the garage with a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The morning light filtered through the window illuminated the truck, revealing decades of wear and abandonment. Rust had taken over various parts of the body. The seats were torn, and the windshield had a crack that ran along its entire length. Even so, for Ernesto, that was the most beautiful sight in the world. His father had come home. During the first weeks, Ernesto dedicated himself to cleaning the outside of the truck, removing layers of accumulated dust and dirt. Each cleaned piece revealed details that awakened new memories of his childhood and youth. He remembered Saturday mornings when he helped his father wash the vehicle, and how João Santos insisted that every inch be impeccable. The hood, after being polished, still displayed small scratches that Ernesto immediately recognized. Marks left by tools during repairs his father did personally. While working, he talked to the truck as if it could hear him, telling about the years that had passed. "Dad always said you were more reliable than any person," he murmured, while polishing the rusty fenders. Daughter Maria arrived the following weekend, bringing her husband Roberto and their 2 teenage children. She found Ernesto in the garage, dirty with grease up to his elbows, working on the engine with the enthusiasm of a professional mechanic. "Dad, look at the state you're in. At your age, you should be resting, not killing yourself with this junk," she scolded, genuinely worried. Roberto, who understood cars, examined the vehicle and was impressed with the work Ernesto had already done. "Your father has a knack for this," he commented to his wife, "and this truck can really become beautiful." The grandchildren, initially uninterested, began asking questions about the paternal grandfather they had never known. Ernesto took advantage of the family's presence to tell stories about João Santos that he had never shared before. He spoke about how his father worked hard as a mason, using the truck to transport construction materials around the city. He described family trips on Sundays, when the whole family squeezed into the front seat to visit relatives in the countryside. "Your grandfather was a simple man, but honest like few," he told his grandchildren, while pointing to specific details of the vehicle. Maria was moved hearing accounts she didn't know about her grandfather, especially about his dedication to the family. Gradually, she began to understand why that truck meant so much to her father. In the following weeks, Ernesto established a rigid work routine for the restoration, getting up early and dedicating at least 6 hours daily to the project. He decided not to use modern parts, preferring to find original components from the era, even if this made the process more time-consuming and expensive. He frequented junkyards and vintage parts fairs, always accompanied by a detailed list of what he needed. The sellers soon knew him as the old man with the blue Ford, and some even set aside parts that might interest him. With each original component found, Ernesto felt indescribable satisfaction, as if he were gathering scattered pieces of his father's soul. The engine, after weeks of careful work, finally ran again with the same smoothness as decades ago. One afternoon, while sanding the bottom of the truck bed to apply anti-corrosive paint, Ernesto noticed something strange in the metal floor. There was a small rectangular protrusion that didn't seem to be part of the truck's original structure. Intrigued, he took a screwdriver and began investigating more closely, discovering it was a small welded cover. The weld edges were crude, clearly amateur work done in haste. Ernesto felt his heart race. After 40 years working as a carpenter, he knew well the signs of when something had been purposely hidden. With trembling hands, he began working carefully to open that mysterious addition to the truck bed floor. What he would find there would completely change his understanding of his late father. After 2 hours of meticulous work with appropriate tools, Ernesto managed to remove the small welded cover, revealing a secret compartment of approximately 20 square centimeters. Inside it, protected by thick plastic, were several documents yellowed by time and a small black-covered notebook. With hands trembling with anxiety, he carefully removed the items and took them inside the house, where the light would be better to examine them. The first document he opened was a birth certificate dated 1962, but the registered name wasn't João Santos. It was Giuseppe Santana, born in Italy. Ernesto felt his legs weaken and had to sit in the kitchen chair, trying to process that shocking discovery. His father, the man he had known his entire life, had changed his identity upon arriving in Brazil. The notebook contained handwritten notes in a mixture of Portuguese and Italian, recounting the journey of a desperate young immigrant to start a new life. Giuseppe had written about his escape from Sicily in 1961, after witnessing a crime involving the local mafia that governed his hometown. He knew his life was in danger if he remained in Italy. As the criminals would discover, he had witnessed the murder of a local merchant who had refused to pay protection. The clandestine trip to Brazil had been arranged by a distant cousin who had been living in São Paulo for some years. Ernesto read each word with growing emotion, discovering a side of his father he had never imagined existed. The calm and hard-working man he had known carried the weight of a terrible secret his entire life. Other documents revealed details about the new identity Giuseppe had created upon arriving in Brazil. With the help of a network of Italian immigrants, he had obtained false Brazilian documents in the name of João Santos, an identity he maintained until death. Young Giuseppe had initially worked on coffee farms in the São Paulo countryside, sending money to the family that remained in Italy. Only years later had he managed to establish himself in the city as a mason, a profession he learned by observing other immigrants. Ernesto found letters from his Italian maternal grandmother, whom he had never known, asking about her missing son and begging for news. João Santos had never answered these letters, fearing that any contact could put the family in danger. The pain of separation was evident in the intimate pages of the diary. One of the most shocking discoveries was an official letter from the Italian police, dated 1965, informing that the criminals Giuseppe feared had been arrested and tried. He could have returned to Italy safely, reunited with his family, and resumed his original identity. However, by this time, João Santos had already met and married Ernesto's mother, building a new family in Brazil. The letter had remained stored, never opened, perhaps because João feared its contents could destroy the life he had built with so much effort. Ernesto then understood why his father always seemed to carry an inexplicable sadness in his eyes, especially during Christmas festivities. The man had lived divided between two identities, two families, and two worlds, never being able to be completely happy in either of them. The last document in the secret compartment was a letter written by João Santos himself, addressed to Ernesto, dated a few months before his death. In it, the father explained his decision to never reveal the truth, fearing it could compromise the Brazilian family's safety or cause unnecessary suffering. "My son," he wrote, "if you are reading this, it means you found my truck and discovered who I really was. Forgive me for never telling the truth, but every lie I lived was out of love for our family." The letter continued explaining he had hidden the documents, hoping that one day Ernesto could know his true history and perhaps establish contact with Italian relatives. João Santos ended the letter asking for forgiveness and declaring that, despite all the secrets, his love for his Brazilian family had always been genuine and unwavering. Ernesto spent entire days rereading the documents and trying to assimilate the magnitude of revelations about his father. At first, he felt betrayed for having lived an entire life without knowing the truth about his family origins. However, as he better understood the circumstances that led Giuseppe to become João Santos, anger gave way to compassion. Imagining his father as a frightened young man, fleeing from criminals and starting a new life in a foreign country, made Ernesto admire him even more. The courage necessary to abandon everything and rebuild an identity from scratch was greater than any heroism he had known. He then decided to research the Italian family he had never known, starting with the names mentioned in the letters found. With the help of Maria and Roberto, who were equally shocked by the discoveries, Ernesto began an online search for his Italian relatives. They discovered that his grandmother had died in the 1990s, but that Giuseppe had two brothers still alive in Sicily. Initial contact was made through a cousin who maintained a social media profile, where she posted photos of the Italian family Ernesto had never seen. The physical resemblance between him and his unknown relatives was impressive, especially with an uncle who had the same light eyes and face shape. When they finally managed to speak by video call, tears flowed freely on both sides of the ocean. The Italian family had spent decades wondering what had happened to Giuseppe, even believing he had died. The Italian relatives told Ernesto details about Giuseppe's personality before his escape, revealing traits he recognized in his father. Young Giuseppe was known for his unwavering honesty and tendency to help people in need, characteristics João Santos had maintained throughout his life. They sent old photos showing Giuseppe working in construction, in Italy, the same profession he had embraced in Brazil. The Italian family expressed immense gratitude for finally knowing what had happened to Giuseppe and for discovering he had lived a happy life, even far from his homeland. They planned a visit to Italy to personally meet relatives and visit the graves of grandparents he had never known. Meanwhile, Ernesto completed the truck restoration with renewed purpose, knowing that each repaired detail was a tribute to his father's courage and determination. The vehicle was impeccable, with the original blue paint restored and all components working perfectly. He decided to keep the secret compartment intact, but now open, as a symbol of truth revealed after decades of concealment. On the first trip with the restored truck, he took Maria and the grandchildren to visit João Santos' grave, where he told the entire discovered story. They placed fresh flowers on the grave, and Ernesto spoke in Italian for the first time in his life, using phrases he had learned from newly discovered relatives. The truck became more than a restored relic. It transformed into a bridge between two families separated by decades and an ocean. Ernesto organized a small museum in his garage, displaying the documents found and photos of Giuseppe João Santos' two families. Neighbors and friends came regularly to hear the incredible story of the man who lived two identities out of love for his families. The discovery brought new meaning to Ernesto's final years, who now dedicated himself to preserving and sharing his brave father's memory. Every night, before sleeping, he walked to the garage to contemplate the blue truck and silently thank his father for the lesson that true love sometimes requires. Unimaginable sacrifices, but that truth, even when revealed late, always finds its way to the light.